Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, and a kind of continuation of our end of year review. This one we're going to be looking at drivers a bit more specifically, rating their seasons, seeing how they did, just assessing the performance of every single driver, and just to make it a bit more fun, we're going to put them in a little tier list on how we've ranked their season over the 17 races that made up the 2023 IndyCar season. So this is going to be split into two episodes just because there are 38 drivers we need to go through, so we'll take us a while. But a lot to look through, so let's crack straight on with this one. We'll start in reverse championship order. As I said, we're going to have 7 categories. NA, we can't really judge them rarely. Bump from the list, didn't do particularly great. Not quite bumps, not great but not brilliant. And mid as Ohio, pretty average. Stronger as a Dallara DW12, you did pretty solidly. Almost created a lab. You've done very well, and then were you creating the lab, you're just an absolute robot. So let's commence with the very unfortunate Stefan Wilson. He obviously qualified for the Indy 500, but was ruled out due to that unfortunate practice accident. So we didn't really see much of Stefan Wilson at all, but odds are we'll see him next season. Might even be rumours to see him at the Thermal Club next season. So not quite the season Stefan Wilson wanted, but these things happen sometimes.
It was a sad story, especially for it to happen, the first major incident we saw really to happen during the week leading up to the race, after already having qualified and done all of the masses of preparation it takes to even qualify, and to not take part in the race, especially for someone like Wilson, who spends the entire year gearing up to do the 500, the only race he does in a season. It was such a disappointing story. I think it's pretty self-explanatory that it'll go in the non-applicable list. But yeah, it would be good to see him at the Thermal Club maybe, but definitely back at the 500. Hopefully a story of redemption.
Yeah, I think he should probably go in the bottom one. I don't know. It's like I said, it was very sad that it happened and you didn't get to see him race. But there's nowhere else to put him really.
Yeah, it feels bad for Stefan Wilson because he qualified fairly comfortably. He wasn't making any headlines, but he qualified comfortably, and you never quite know what's going to happen in a race. But I think we're all agreed he's going to have to go straight in NA. Don't think there's too much else to touch on Wilson, apart from we hope to see you next year. 37th, Catherine Legg.
Catherine Legg was quite impressive. Yeah, she was quite impressive by the fact that she was the leading RLL car in qualifying, while her 3 teammates who were on the team full time had to return for bump day. She managed to get into the race, which was impressive. And unfortunately, the race didn't go as she would have wanted. She had her day ended prematurely. She had the incident in the pit lane and again some sort of issue as well. So yeah, the race didn't go as she would have liked, but she did an impressive job to actually get in the field without having to return for bump day after such a long hiatus without being in an IndyCar.
Yeah, it was almost 10 years, wasn't it? So it was quite a while, and RLL's issues in May have been dealt with quite significantly, but she looked fairly comfortable the entire time. She didn't really look like at any point she was going to have to come back, and especially in a 4th car as well. It's kind of a team made up of everyone else, and she's performed fantastically. And although, as you said, the race didn't go her way, she had some sort of mechanical issue in the end. It was a decent outing.
I don't know. It was like you said. She was like she was the leading car then, and if it wasn't for like what happened then, I feel like she could have done really well, and it would have been really nice to kind of see that. Yeah, I'm not quite sure where to put her. I think
straight in NA. Straight in NA.
Yeah, probably right though. I'm getting confused between two.
Yeah, I don't think we saw enough of Legg to really make a proper assumption, but what we did see of her was pretty encouraging. But at the end of the day, she only did like a quarter of the race or something, so it's not particularly representative. There we are, 2 NAs. Next one we're going to go to is another Indy 500 only. There's going to be quite a few. It's RC Unison, who did all right. Qualified fairly comfortably, similarly to Legg. He was kind of a comeback story after failing to qualify in 2021. And again, similar to Legg, he kind of had some sort of mechanical issue, but he showed strong in qualifying.
I think him and the entire Able Motorsports team deserve a lot of credit for, the way that their month of May went, while you had this powerhouse in Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan just faltering and seeing their 3 full-time cars end up in, last chance qualifying. Emerson very comfortably got in the field. I think if I remember correctly, he might have only run once as well, and that was enough to get him in, qualify 28th. And yeah, it was unfortunate again that his race ended prematurely, but a good story of redemption after failing to make the race previously.
Yeah,
I think he did well in that aspect, but also we didn't see a lot of him, so I feel like who knows how it could have gone afterwards. That it could have gone really well, it could have gone worse. So probably have to put him in the bottom category.
A bit of a shame for RC Unison, but hopefully we'll see him back next year, because it was certainly encouraging not only for him but for the kind of start out of Enable Motorsport. So pretty encouraging first Indy 500 campaign for them, and let's hope we see them back next year. I think we're all agreed. NA.
Yep, NA. Probably, I would say though, more impressive than Leg even.
More impressive than Leg. Oh, he qualified ahead of Leg, and I think considering it was a first time outfit, let's put him there. Next up, another Indy 500 only. Marco Andretti. I believe he's the first one that we've got to actually finish the race. I don't remember watching Andretti's campaign, apart from that interview we had in qualifying, where didn't he say the car was absolutely awful or something and started having a weird go at everyone. Other than that, I can't remember much of what Andretti did.
Yeah, I think for the Andretti team as a whole, I know Kyle Kirkwood at one point looked in the position where he could potentially contend for the 500 before the incident, which obviously saw the wheel fly out of the track. But yeah, it was a disappointing month for the team, really, on the whole. And I think for Marco, it was a very, very underwhelming Indy 500 campaign. Given what we know he can produce, to have qualified 24th was disappointing. And then he finished 17th pretty much by virtue of retirements behind him. There weren't, many cars that really did a worse job than him that finished the race, unfortunately.
Yeah, didn't really see much of Marco at all day. I mean, it's not bad considering how many cars got into accidents, but I think it was quite forgettable in the Indy 500. Where are you putting him? NA?
The thing is,
he finished the race.
There's higher standards with Marco Andretti, I feel, and by those standards, it was a very disappointing Indy 500 campaign, I feel, given that this is all he does in terms of a year in IndyCar. I think he was disappointed. He was often frustrated, as you said. So, yeah, I'd be tempted to put him in bump from the list, but maybe it feels harsh. But I think we saw enough from him, and we have seen enough from him over time to, not being non-applicable.
Cool. Go back from the list. It's a harsh one, but I think maybe you expected slightly more. The first one we kind of got a bit more of an understanding of is Tom Blomqvist. Stepped in 3 races in Toronto, Portland, and Laguna Seca, stepping in for Simon Pagenaud. Didn't see too much of Blomqvist, but we saw some signs of encouragement. He ran very well in Toronto straight off the bat, which was particularly impressive. Obviously, we're going to see him in a full-time capacity next year, which is super, super exciting. Obviously, a top class driver in endurance racing. And I'm excited to see what he could do. I don't think he had the opportunity to show us too much, but there were flashes of potential there.
I think it probably is a slightly too early to judge Blomqvist really off those 3 races. His first 3 races in IndyCar, he qualified quite well in Toronto with changing conditions in qualifying, with it wet to dry, and to qualify and start 20th was impressive. And then it was massively unfortunate that he was caught up in that early incident when 3 wide just didn't go, and I think it was Jack Harvey the instigator, and Blomqvist ended up in the wall, and that was his day done. And then I think from there on in, Portland, Laguna were struggles for him actually. It just felt there was a bit of a struggle to find pace. It's natural. He isn't, it's his first experience of this car. I think compared to what we saw Linus Lundqvist do, it was disappointing maybe, but at the end of the day, Blomqvist is, this is just about getting his eye in, and the real work starts in St. Pete next year.
Yeah, and I think Toronto showed potential. It's a shame that they ended on lap 1. Didn't see too much of him in Portland, Laguna Seca, but again, I don't think we really expected that. And as you said, I think it's all eyes forward to next year. There's some encouraging signs straight off the bat, which is great news for Blomqvist, and he's a driver which is highly rated by many, and I'm excited to see what he can do in a full-time capacity in IndyCar.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you've been saying. I think he did really well, and I think he has that potential, and I would have loved to see what he would be able to do if he raced more, and kind of the results that he would get from that as well. But we're going to see that next season, so.
So where's Blomqvist going? NA?
I would be tempted to put him in NA just for the fact that it feels like we didn't really see enough to judge or gauge really a full picture of where he's at yet.
Yeah, I think he was involved in 2 incident full races, so he probably only got 1 full outing of Blomqvist. So probably NA, I'd say, is fair.
Yeah, I think it would be too harsh to put him in the bump from the list.
So another one kind of similar to Blomqvist, actually. Yuri Vips got 2 run-outs at the end of the year in Portland and Laguna. Vips was encouraging, particularly in Laguna Seca. Did he qualify with fast over the end? I think he did. And he was right on the pace all weekend, and unfortunately he got involved in that lap 1 melee. But the signs were definitely there, reminiscent of what Lundgaard did a couple of years ago, which is a great start for Vips, and obviously it's not confirmed yet. It looks pretty likely, and let's hope he can keep it up next year.
Yeah, I mean, Portland was tough. However, he still managed to qualify 18th. Yes, the pace of the RLL cars was greater than that, but this is, it was the first time he'd stepped in a car all year, and the first time he'd raced and done a competitive weekend in IndyCar, and to compare him 18th in Portland, it was a respectable enough run. But then Laguna was where he really showed what he's worth, really. And in qualifying, he was right up there in across the practice sessions. Then to qualify 7th was an almighty effort, really. It was a shame that he had a grid drop, and then ultimately he was right in the middle of the pack and got involved in that first lap chaos, really. And again, that kind of curtailed his meaningful running. But I think in terms of his pace, just through practice sessions and obviously qualifying 7th, albeit with the grid drop, I feel was enough that it might warrant him that seat for next season. He was encouraging first signs.
Absolutely agreed. I think, as I said, I think Lundgaard had a similar sort of initial showing, and Portland wasn't always going to be the easiest measure for Vips. Laguna Seca is a bit more of a familiar one to kind of the European style of racing, which would have suited Vips, which it showed. And it was disappointing we didn't really see him get a full run out, because in Portland he was unspectacular. He wasn't amazing, but he wasn't terrible. But you can't really expect too much of someone like that on your debut. And it's just a bit disappointing we didn't really see him get the full run out at Laguna Seca. Think NA for this one?
Yeah, I would say so.
Top of
NA? I think so.
But yeah, top of NA. I think he made more of an impression for me than Blomqvist did. But that's not to say Blomqvist won't go on to be a really solid option for my Shank, because I definitely feel like he will be.
Yep. Right, next one. Bit of a more experienced head. TK. Tony Kanaan. In his final year of any IndyCar racing, he's obviously moved on to special advisor for Aaron McLaren. Finished 16th in his final Indianapolis 500. A glorious career. I don't think it was a particularly glorious last race. If we were looking at the race individually, he made a pretty nice pass on McLaughlin in the grass. Other than that, he qualified 9th, so pretty decent day there. It's done spectacular, really, for TK.
I think it's always going to be more difficult when it's an additional entry. I know the top teams can kind of negate that, but yeah, I think for him to qualify 9th for his final 500 was really solid. And okay, the race maybe didn't go as he would have loved it to have gone, but he ended up, finishing almost side by side with his good friend and longtime competitor, countryman, Helio Castro Neves, of course. So I think for TK it was there was no glory, there was no victory, but it was quite a glorious way to end. Really, it felt quite fitting.
Yeah, it felt okay, but also at the same time, because it's his last one, I feel like people maybe expect him to try and go out with a bang, or like hope that he would. But like just on the one entry, it was really good. But then if you consider like his career and it being like the last race, I'm not quite sure where you would place that. So
I think, as you said, TK, it wasn't easy in the fourth entry, but McLaren have always been strong at the 500. I don't think there was any expectation he'd be on the pace of O'Ward, Rossi, or Rosenqvist. But it was pretty strong in qualifying. You had that pretty iconic moment of Carpenter where it ended up on exactly the same lap time. Well, shall I say 4-lap average, which was, I think, one of my moments of the season. We didn't mention it last week, and I'm sorry we didn't, because that was a moment and a half. But he qualified all right. Pretty quiet race. I mean, you took McLaughlin on the grass, which is pretty cool, but that was about it.
Yeah, I think maybe this warrants a mid as Ohio, probably.
Ooh.
I don't think...
I'm thinking not quite bumped. Slightly disappointing, maybe.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I don't think it was... Yeah, I mean, it obviously wasn't spectacular. I don't think it was horrific, but yeah, that can... that's right, that sounds all right for me.
Not quite bumped. I think TK's legacy deserved a bit more, so we'll see what happens in that front. Right, 31st, I think someone who will probably be right up there, Linus Lundqvist. 3 races for Meyer Shank in Nashville, the Indy Road Course, and Worldwide Technology Raceway. Lundqvist was very, very impressive. I mean, it's so impressive that IndyCar's top dogs have decided to sign him for next year.
Yeah, talk about making an impression. I mean, he was immediately on the pace, even really faster than Castro Neves in Nashville, and this was a tough place to make your debut. I mean, obviously renowned for its chaos, the margins are so fine, with the walls so tight around the streets, yet he really just didn't seem to feel, any pressure, any apprehension. He was just straight on the pace and really out to prove a point, and qualified 11th in Nashville. I think it was maybe the second best road or street course qualifying that car had all year. I think Pagenaud qualified a little bit better in Detroit. But then he followed that up with a 12th place qualifying on the Indy Road Course, and then 12th at Gateway. I think maybe penalties raised him up a little bit at Gateway, but they are some very solid efforts on 3 different track types. And Nashville, he was running well in the race and unfortunately ended up hitting the wall, still took away the fastest lap there. Got the result he deserved on the Indy Road Course to finish 12th. I think he was a bit disappointed with 18th at Gateway, but that's still a respectable first oval race. And
got fastest lap there too. Fastest
lap there as well. Exactly. I think it was at least as strong as a Dallara DW12.
It's good effort from Lundqvist, I think. Everyone knew he had it in him. We were just waiting for this chance to happen, and boy, did he take his chances with 2 hands. He really impressed. I mean, he was the most impressive Shank driver this year in almost every way you looked at it. The fact he was so strong in qualify and beat Castro Neves despite coming in mid-season was just mighty, mighty impressive from Lundqvist. And this is what he could do to Shank halfway through a year. Imagine what he could do in a full year at Ganassi. I'm so excited to see what he can do, and he's a super nice guy as well. And what I really liked about Lundqvist is that he, straight from the bat, he was already looking at ways for improvement. Even after day one, he was looking, I could have done this slightly better. I would have changed the way I've done this. And that's exactly what you want to see out of a driver. He didn't seem phased, but he seemed a bit down to earth. He wasn't getting ahead of himself. And I was really a big fan of that from Linus Lundqvist.
I think definitely as his debut and kind of has it's been on the 3 races and IndyCar, I feel like it was really impressive as well. As I said, he was on track with his teammate, who has been in this for ages and who's had even a full season as well. And for him to kind of come in and in his second race outfinish his teammate is really, really good.
I think Lundqvist was stronger as a Dallara DW12. I think he exceeded expectations. He wasn't like, we can't get ahead of ourselves too much here, but I think it was mighty impressive and deserves that category for me.
Yeah, I think for Chip Ganassi to have seen those 3 races, and he probably even started thinking about, making that move before Gateway. I think to impress Chip like he has done, that takes some serious work.
Yep. Right, this man we touched on quite a bit in our Gateway review. Got to bring him back up, Ed Carpenter. I'll start off. He wasn't very good. I don't think for Ed Carpenter. I think maybe a retirement could be potentially seen as long overdue. He wasn't particularly strong in any of the races he did. He qualified quite well in one of the Iowa races really randomly. Qualified 4th in Iowa too, but average finished 21st. Was just pretty poor all year round. It was causing incidents. He was pretty slow at times. Just wasn't impressive at all, really, was it?
No. I mean, he's on an oval program because, that's supposed to be his specialty. He enjoys running the tracks, and, over the time, he has really proven to be an accomplished oval driver, but this year was just tremendously disappointing. I mean, his best finish was 13th at Texas, and other than that, he was finishing in the 20s. Even the Indy 500 was pretty poor. Qualified 13th, but he only really just fell back from there. And yeah, it was not a splendid year for Ed in terms of the ovals at all. And it will be interesting to see whether in the coming years he does decide that, maybe it's time to give up the full oval schedule and maybe even just switch to doing the 500.
Yeah, I think when you're brought on as well for like just ovals and that, the expectation is probably much higher than if you was racing like the entire year. I feel like I don't know. I feel like you just meant to come in and you meant to do really well, which he could have done a lot better.
I think. Well, might as well touch on this first. There are rumours Carpenter's seat might be filled by either Oliver Askew or Christian Rasmussen, which I'd like to see. At least if they are going to use Ed's car, at least use it for road courses as well, instead of letting it sit in a factory for those races. It just, on his year specifically, it just, the pace wasn't there at all. I mean, I think Gateway weekend was he qualified last by a mile and then ran into Peterson in the first corner, and that was just a calamitous day. And it kind of sums up his season. He isn't getting any better with the years, it seems, and I think he still runs all right. The Indy 500 has been close to winning there before, and I think he really does want that illustrious win. And it'd be nice for him to do an Indy Oval program, but I think judging it by his performances this year, I don't really think a full Oval program is particularly justified. Yeah,
I actually think on your previous point about someone else possibly filling the seat for road and street courses, it's slightly confusing that hasn't happened before, really, because at the end of the day, the car is there and it's ready to be used. You've got the engine supplied, so yeah, I'm not really sure why they haven't tried to fill it. And as I think it was Racer reported that it looks like it's going to be Christian Rasmussen and Oliver Askew as the 2 contenders. Maybe whoever doesn't get the full-time seat can then, maybe still run in IndyCar as they both deserve, really, and as part of Ed's program.
I really hope they do, because both Rasmussen and Askew are really strong drivers. Rasmussen's obviously the latest Indy Next champion, and as proved by Lundqvist, as proved by Kirkwood, as proved by O'Ward. These Indy Next champions aren't slouches. And on the other flip side of the occasion, Oliver Askew, I feel his IndyCar chart, well, it was 1 year in reality, and I think Askew, he showed flashes, in the first year of McLaren, and this was the first year McLaren were in IndyCar and they were still finding their feet. Yes, he wasn't as strong as O'Ward's, but O'Ward's been up against a whole calibre of different drivers, and none of them have been particularly close to his level. And I think Askew deserves another chance, and I would really like to see him get another chance, even if that is a road and street only program. I think Askew would be well deserving of a seat as well as Rasmussen. Right, back to Ed. I think back from the list.
Yeah, I agree.
I also agree.
Cool. Put him ahead of Marco, because he did a bit more. But yeah, wasn't a great year. Let's go to the other oval only driver, Takuma Sato. Bit better than Ed. Best qualifying of 6th in Texas. A best race finish of 7th in the Indy 500. Qualified 8th in the Indy 500 as well. But that's sort of where it ends. There were a couple of Crushford weekends. Gateway in particular. He was flirting with the walls all day until he finally found it. And then Texas as well. He crashed out fairly early on. I think, obviously, that car wasn't eligible for the leader circle, but the whole point of it was to get some points, get some experience in the car whilst Armstrong was still learning and by sitting on the sidelines. And so I didn't really do that at all.
I think it's kind of a very similar conversation to Carpenter, really. I mean, you know how strong Ganassi are, obviously, and I think you would have expected Sato to come in and do a much better job than he did, really. He was making a lot of mistakes, and it was kind of just a messy year for him, really. I mean, to finish 7th at the 500 after all is pretty good going, but it was either a solid finish or just bin it, really. And I don't think, I mean, that's why Ganassi have not, been in any hurry to bring Sato back on board, and instead of giving Armstrong the full season for 24.
I think Sato's a similar one to Carpenter. He's 46, 47 now. He's well past his best years, and yes, I see exactly why Ganassi brought him in, but he's always had this do or die attitude, and it just didn't work this year. And he was just a bit all over the place. As I mentioned, particularly in the Gateway weekend, he just looked so inevitable to hit the barriers until he finally did, and he was causing chaos everywhere. And people fell out of him at Gateway. I can't remember who it was, but I think it was Ilott was one who had words about Sato. And for someone with such experience, you'd expect a bit more from him. I reckon.
I reckon he did a bit better than Ed, just because he finished higher. But I feel like he's just around the same.
Yeah, is he going and not quite bumped from the list?
I would probably be harsh and say bump from the list. I think he just should have done better than he did this year, to be honest.
Cool. I think it was better than Ed.
Yeah.
But it wasn't particularly good. Right, so the next one's, I'd say, probably one of the toughest ones we're going to do. Simon Pagenaud. Obviously had that horror accident in Mid-Ohio, which he thankfully walked away from. But that was, unfortunately, the last we saw of Simon Pagenaud this year. It might even be the last we see of Simon Pagenaud in IndyCar. It's just a bit of a shame. It's very hard to rank his season just because of what happened. But if you look at the stats, best finish of 18th for Detroit, where he got his best finish of 13th. His average race finish was 19th. Coming into Mid-Ohio, he was both behind Castroneves in the standings. I mean, it's a hard one. I don't think Pagenaud was particularly spectacular by any means, but it's just a bit disappointing. We can't really assess him properly.
I think heading into Mid-Ohio, actually, we were looking at his season as really having been quite an underwhelming one, quite a disappointing one. I think, regardless of the incident, his future was probably going to be very seriously assessed. But yeah, obviously, the incident, you don't get a full picture of what he could have achieved across the season, and it's just, again, and we've said it a lot, it's just a very sad story. And if this is how his IndyCar career, a full-time IndyCar career, ends, then it's a bit rubbish, to be honest. It was obviously a violent accident, and it didn't help that it was being shown nearly every weekend on the broadcast when they were talking about whoever was replacing him. But yeah, it was not a great year up to then, actually, for Pagenaud, to be honest. But yeah, as you said, it's quite hard to actually judge where he ranks.
Yeah, I mean, results were slightly picking up coming into Mid-Ohio. He obviously had that bizarre crash at the Indy 500, and then obviously that huge opening lap crash in St. Petersburg. We just didn't really see enough of Pagenaud to properly assess him. But if you look at the statistics on paper, he was behind Castroneves. He hadn't done anything particularly of note, dare I say it, coming up to that point. So if I were to rank him, I'd probably say not quite bumps, but I don't think it's an easy decision to make at all.
It's hard as well because of what happened. He didn't even make it to like Mid Ohio, and I think around that point is where you could really determine kind of like how everyone's season was going to end a little bit more, because some people started to get like a better season, and some people like further down kind of got like a worse season. But then not being able to like see that and see like the full stats, it is hard to kind of place him.
Archie, you got a preference on where he goes?
I'd be tempted to maybe put him in not quite bumped, because I think his season was disappointing. It was a bit messy, but then you can't really judge it, wholly and come down too harshly, because at the end of the day there was a bit of an upturn prior to Mid Ohio, and
better than TK?
It's the right shame. I would say so, yeah.
Better to put him higher than TK. Yeah, it's a bit of a hole to judge, and I desperately hope we see Simon Pagenaud somewhere, whether that's an Indy 500 only or the Furman or something. I desperately hope we see him, because I don't want his IndyCar career to end on a monster accident like that. Let's go to the first driver who competed in all 17 races of this season, Benjamin Pedersen. Wasn't a great year. Average finish was 23rd. The best of that was 15th place in Texas. And he qualified 11th for the Indy 500, so he became the fastest ever rookie in that event. It's a weird. I mean, Pedersen's a rookie. You've got to assess it that way. He is a rookie, and he had a lot to learn. I think the expectations of him was fairly low, particularly coming into a Foyt car, but he wasn't particularly incredible either by any stretch of the imagination.
I mean, he did come in having finished 5th in Indy Lights, so it's not like he came in with, maybe the expectations that someone like Linus Lundqvist next season will do, or Kyle Kirkwood did when he came into the series last year. But yeah, it's a disappointing one for Pedersen, really. I think you actually look, his super speedway form, it was good. He finished 15th in Texas on merit in only his second race and his first oval race, which is actually, when you consider how his season went, a really good result, because I think that was his only, until Laguna, his only finish that was inside the top 20. But yeah, I think the fact that he finished in the 20s so often and just couldn't find pace, he annoyed a lot of drivers with obviously the lapped car incident where he just wasn't letting them past. Was that Mid Ohio?
Yeah, and then got pulled over in Iowa for, was it lack of pace or whatever it was? Which was
lack of competitive speed.
Yeah.
So not a great rookie year, all considered, really. I mean, he's finished behind, as we'll come on to, Ryan Hunter-Reay, who did 11 races, Connor Daly, who did 11, Jack Harvey, who did 14. So he's finished behind drivers who competed in 6 fewer events than him, and were deemed by many to have had underwhelming seasons. And in the case of Connor Daly, he was kicked out of Ed Carpenter Racing for not performing well enough, as they perceived. So I think there's a lot still to prove for Benjamin Pedersen next year. He will be back next year. He's got a multi-year deal with Foyt, and
so we think.
So we believe. And there's some suggestions that he might be searching around for other options just in case. But I think if he doesn't find anything, we'll probably see him back at Foyt. So yeah, I think being a rookie, you don't want to come down too harshly. I think we'll say all the same things really about Stingray Robb when we come on to him. But I think for me, I'd put him in not quite bumped, as sort of a view to that being sort of requires improvement, but you can have another year to be properly judged.
Yeah, it was a disappointing year, but at the end of the day, your rookie year is always going to be a learning year, and the only way I think is up for Benjamin Pedersen. And as you said, there were signs of, I wouldn't say brilliance, but there were signs of potential as shown in the Indy 500 and at Texas, but as shown kind of by short overform, that there is just a lot to learn in a very short space of time. And Whether he's back next year or not, it remains to be seen. I don't think people are going to be particularly sorrowful if we do see him go, but it's always it's always tough as a rookie. We'll see how it gets on. I'd put him bumped from the list, but I'll go with the majority here.
Oh, so this is in my hands. I don't know. It's because it's like he's a rookie, so then I don't want to like say that he should be performing better, but then at the same time, it's like I said, there's drivers who have had less races and have qualified above him. So you've also got to take that into consideration. I feel like just because he's a rookie, bumped from the list may be too harsh. So I'd probably just put him in not quite bumped.
Put in the bottom of not quite bumped. Yeah, pretty underwhelming year around for Peterson.
Yeah, no, agreed. But I think, to be fair, one thing, I think he was the fastest ever rookie we've seen at the Indy 500. So he at least has that to take away. I think he qualified 11th there in the end. So it's little crumbs really you're looking for of positivity, because I think, yeah, on the whole, it was disappointing, and he definitely has big steps he needs to make.
Right, 26th, Ryan Hunter-Reay. Obviously competed the Indy 500 for Dreyer Reinbold, finished 11th there, and then stepped in for Connor Daly for the last 10 races of the year. Best finish of 10th for the very chaotic Laguna Seca. Best qualifying was in Iowa, with an average race finish of 18th. It wasn't spectacular by Hunter-Reay. I think Daly did comfortably better in his outings for ECR, but I think Hunter-Reay was just a stopgap just to get a bit more experience in the team. And to be fair, VK showed an upturn in form by the end of the year. Whether that was Hunter-Reay's work remains to be seen, but he wasn't amazing. He wasn't terrible, but he wasn't. I wouldn't say he was any better than Daly was.
I think personally, because he came in to replace Daly, I would have expected him to do a bit better. I know that he was maybe like coming in for development and all that, but still, I feel like if the team is taking that like action and that to remove a driver and replace him, then you would think that they'd maybe want someone who would just, I don't know, compete better and kind of finish better than he did. I don't know, maybe he did make loads of like development behind the scenes that we don't know about, but I think just seeing it as we do, I did expect like more.
Yeah, I think this is one, and was always going to be one, that comes down to the intangibles that we aren't really privy to. So, you know, whether he really did elevate things behind the scenes, and whether he, you know, his leadership did guide Rinus VK to the better form he showed towards the end of the year. I think on track, you've got to say Hunter-Reay was fairly uninspiring. He wasn't, you know, as you said, Dan, wasn't absolutely terrible, but he didn't really, you know, show standout results as maybe you would have thought, when the reasons that Ed Carpenter Racing gave for getting rid of Daly were the fact that he wasn't performing to the level they expected. So, yeah, I mean, it was a move that it didn't make sense to us at the time, and you know, we'll come on to Daly next, but yeah, I think it will only show in the longer run whether it was the right decision. But in terms of pure performance, you know, it's just didn't really change anything, to be honest. They, across their 11 races each, obviously Daly competed a few with different teams. Hunter-Reay did the 500 with Dreyer and Reinbold. Both for the same average finish. I think Daly's was marginally higher, but all kind of rounds to 18th as their average race finish. Daly's highest finish was slightly better, 8th in the 500. Hunter-Reay, you know, almost slightly fortuitously finishing 10th at Laguna. But yeah, I wouldn't say he did a bad enough job to be bumped from the list, but I'd say just not quite bumped. It was just an uninspiring, you know.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, he wasn't bad, but he wasn't inspiring is the right word here. Where's he go in relation to Peterson, TK, and Pagenaud?
I think I'd maybe put him further forward.
Forward?
Yeah.
Pagenaud? Yeah.
Pretty much on par with Pagenaud, I would say.
And oh yeah. Right. Ahead of him, as you mentioned, Connor Daly raced for 3 different teams this year. Did the first 7 races of the year for Ed Carpenter Racing, did Mid-Ohio and the 2 Iowas for Maya Shank, just stepping in because they needed someone with a bit more oval experience, and did Gateway for Rahul Letterman Lanigan, as the man we'll mention next was dropped. I think Daly was not too bad. I think his replacement appearances were particularly respectable. I think Gateway in particular stands out quite a bit because he was comfortably quicker than both teammates in qualifying in the race, and let's not forget it was the first time stepping into that car, and that was, I think, pretty impressive. He qualified quite well. I think it was his best qualifying of the year in 15th. Iowa, again, he did alright. And I think at Mid-Ohio he did actually very well considering the circumstances. He was he beat Castroneves in the end in the same team, and he's only just off, ironically, Ryan Hunter-Reay. And I think his Ed Carpenter time, we worked out that I think Daly had 77 in his first 7 races. Hunter-Reay had 66 in ECR, and he was, as he always does, pretty good at the 500. I think maybe once you delve into it a bit more, Daly's not been terrible, but again, it's not been amazing. But I don't think it's as bad as it looks to an outsider.
Well, I think when you hear that he's been dropped for performance grounds, you immediately think, well, that's really bad. He must have been doing a terrible job. He immediately has to go in the bottom tier, all of that. But yeah, I think you have to look a lot closer. I think we were very outspoken about the decision at the time. I did a piece on it. It just felt unjust. I think at that point in the season, after 7 races, it felt like too short a time to really make that decision when actually teammate Rinus VK had done no better. Daly had, I think, a 4-3 head-to-head in his favour in terms of race finishes even. He was coming off his best road and street, second best road and street finish, 15th in Detroit, although he felt that was probably his best road and street performance of the season, I think, because St. Pete finished 14th, but I think he was actually laps down given the way that race unfolded. Also coming off 8th at the Indy 500, always reliable there. But yeah, I think it really shows there's more than meets the eye in terms of, the fact that other teams, when they need someone to call upon, it's immediately Daly really that they consider. And Maya Shank took him on board for Mid-Ohio, clearly saw enough to want to bring him back for the Iowa doubleheader where he performed respectably. I mean, he finished 20th in Mid-Ohio. I think that was a race he was right on the back of Hunter-Reay by the end of it. And this was, an equipment he hadn't driven before and that really hadn't been performing that well at all either. But yeah, I think the fact that he's seen as, really reliable by other teams, especially on ovals, and can come in and you can trust him to deliver. I think that does show that, ultimately, we don't know what happened behind the scenes at Ed Carpenter Racing, but I think there's probably a bigger picture. Really, I don't think it was just too harsh to say that he was performing badly, so we'll get rid of him. I think they must have just wanted a change of direction, maybe someone with, Hunter-Reay's vast experience as opposed to Daly, who hasn't yet won a race, for instance, despite running over 100 races. So, yeah, I think it was a good season for Daly in terms of, especially the latter part with his fill-in jobs that proved that he really isn't a slouch.
I think as well, because he's competed in like 3 different cars and kind of his results kind of stayed similar-ish. For the first 7, he was had an average of 17, and then for the last 4, he had an average of 18 or 18th. So I feel like to be able to kind of stay on level with your results despite having different setups and different cars, it is also that's also good, because I feel like every car is obviously set up differently and it can take a while for you to get used to it, and for him to be able to just kind of go in and do it and to still be how he was at the beginning is good as well.
Where's Daly going?
It's a tough one really, because I think he was probably more impressive than Hunter Ray on the whole. I mean, I think you said at the time after Hunter Ray had done 7 races, Daly's 7 races actually were better than Hunter Ray's 7 in terms of points scored. It feels possibly wrong to put him in the sort of mid as Ohio average tier when he did lose his seat for performance grounds, but I think I would argue that maybe he does warrant being put there just for the fact that he steps into these different cars and despite the adversity of losing his seat, he continued to, prove a point and adapt fairly well. And as you said, when he was at RLL in particular, really had the measure of his teammates for a large part of the Gateway weekend. So he's almost right in between not quite bumped
Very
and mid as
close.
Ohio. I'd maybe put him at the top of not quite bumped.
I think I'd agree there. I think at the end of the day, he did lose his seat for performance reasons. Whatever way you look at that, his performances wasn't good enough for his team. So I don't think you can put him as an average driver. But I think that was harsh, and he proved what he can do. So I think he deserves to be top of not quite bumped.
Yeah, I agree. If there was a category between those two, I feel like he'd be in it as well.
Right, let's move on to the other guy who lost his seat due to performance reasons, Jack Harvey. I don't really know where to start from this one. It's just a car crash from the very start, really.
Yeah, I think this is more clear cut, and you can't really debate the getting rid of him because simply didn't believe that he had it in him to really push to get them in the leaders' circle in those closing races. And I think it spoke volumes about where he was at, that they put a rookie in the car instead of him. And yeah, I mean, it was just a sorry couple of years. I mean, we've spoken a lot about Harvey over time, and something's gone catastrophically wrong at RLL for him to go from 12th place in the championship with Meyer Shank in 2021 to, I think he managed 1 top 10 across his 2 years with RLL. His best finish this year was 13th. He did qualify 4th on the Indy Road Course. We thought that could be a real turning point, but even that day quickly became undone, and nothing seemed to go right for him. I think he was clearly caught in a bit of a rut where he wasn't performing well, and ultimately it kind of just spiraled, and he couldn't get out of that hole, and sadly, and I don't want it to be a stint that reflects on Harvey's talent, because clearly he's shown he was an esteemed driver in the junior ranks, and with Meyer Shank Racing he was really guiding that team and doing an excellent job. But yeah, it's just been a disastrous 2 years at RLL, and I think maybe we did speak about this last episode with my prediction that it couldn't get worse for him, so he was going to be the surprise of the season or most improved or whatever it was. But yeah, it managed to get worse than a very bad last year. So yeah, I feel for him, and unfortunately racing is a results business, and people will see that these have been his most recent couple of years, the most recent couple of years on his resume. So it will be hard for him to find a route back in. I hope he can, because I don't feel this is a true reflection of what Jack Harvey is capable of. But yeah, just a torrid year.
Yeah, it's disappointing because at Meyer Shank, Harvey was, I wouldn't say a top prospect, but he was certainly encouraging, and we have spoke about him in length, so we won't go too much into it. But at the end of the day, he got trounced by both his teammates. I think maybe the only highlight of the year was making it in the Indy 500, as we said last week. But there's just... It's a shame we struggle to find any positives at this time at RLL, because the move looks so encouraging and just hasn't worked out. And as you said, it'd be nice to see Harvey on the grid, because I don't think he is a bad driver by any means. But where that opportunity is remains to be seen. Up from the list?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. I think goes there to Sato and Carpenter, just because he did all races and there were flashes, but certainly not enough. Right. Next full-time driver, Stingray Rob. I think a season which started off quite turmoil, but there were positives to take towards the end of the year. The results significantly improved. That was reflected by the P12 and Laguna Seca. Obviously, that doesn't quite tell you the whole picture. But I think Rob, on a personal standpoint, improved significantly towards the end of the year. You could see that he was involved in less accidents. He was much more consistent, and the pace was slightly better. And at the end of the day, if you compare him to the other rookie, Benjamin Pedersen, he beat the stand-ins, which are Hunter A. Daly and Harvey. And I think when you consider other factors, like the team had their own issues in regards to pit stops and setup, I don't think it's as bad as it looks by any means.
It's like you said as well, it's towards like the first half or whenever it was, he was involved in quite a few accidents, and it got to a point sometimes where if something happened, I feel like in the back of your mind maybe you would know it was him, and kind of towards the end he kind of just managed to stay out of it a bit more, and he kind of just focused on like himself and his race rather than rather than getting involved in that. So yeah, I feel like he did better in that aspect, and I don't know what else to add on.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we spoke to Stingray, he was coming off a back of a period where he was just struggling to finish races, and at least struggling to finish races without having some sort of incident. I know there was the occasional bit of misfortune as well, but he was making a lot of mistakes. But I think maybe post Indy 500, starting with Detroit, which I think was the race before we spoke to him, there has been a real upturn. I don't recall him, wrecking any cars beyond there. Yes, he may have sometimes lacked the pace, but he wasn't, I feel like he outperformed Benjamin Pedersen pretty comfortably, and, in that respect, it would feel very harsh if Rob was to lose his seat and then Pedersen would be staying on, but racing can be cruel like that. But yeah, I genuinely felt like the second part of the year for Rob was much improved. I think there are obviously things out of his control. I think that was outlined by the issue at Iowa when his wheel came. So I think there were a few careless mistakes from his team. You'd see the time of his pit stops in the corner of the screen while watching races, and they'd always been sort of noteworthy how much longer they were than some of the top teams. So I think there was a lot out of his control, but he definitely developed as the year went on. And I feel like when you consider that trajectory, it would be good to see what he can produce next year. He's no slouch after all. He finished second in the Indy Lights Championship last year. So, he's a talented driver, and there are suggestions that he's getting backing and he's got a budget behind him, but it's just about finding an opening, and I hope he does find an opening because, again, like we said with Pedersen, it's just harsh to judge a rookie after 1 year, and I feel like with the improvements Rob's shown latterly, it would just feel like it'd be a real sort of sting if he doesn't get a seat for next year.
It would be a shame because the feedback I've heard, and when we spoke to him as well, is that he's great to work with and he's very insightful and he's keen to learn. And yes, there were issues at the start of the year, but I think most of them have been ironed out, and there was a much more improved driver. And if you look at his junior record, he just needs a second year to develop, which is the important thing here, because in almost every series he's participated in, he's built on his second year much more significantly, and I just think he needs that chance because he certainly deserves it, and hopefully, as you said, with the backing, he can find somewhere. But it's definitely not as bad as people make it out to be, or it looks at all, because he's taken some significant improvements.
Yeah, it's a great point you make actually about improving in his second year, because he finished 8th in his first year of Indy Lights, but then come 22, with Andretti, he opened the season with a 4th and then 3 successive 3rd places. So after not picking up a single podium and having a fairly tough first year in 21, he was on the podium in pretty much half of the races. So, you would hope that maybe the story would be the same, and he clearly is, as you say, willing to learn and improve.
I think as well, just rookies are expected to make some mistakes, and I feel like what separates kind of good rookies is the ones who, like I said, can learn from mistakes, which is what he's done, and he kind of, I don't know, just take everything as a lesson rather than making the mistakes and then continuing to make them, which isn't what he did. He continued to improve, and if he didn't get his seat next year, that would be very harsh. I just think rookies in general should get at least 2 years, and if he doesn't get that, that'd just be very disappointing on his end.
I think Rob goes in not quite bumped here. Just a case of where does he go in that level. I think probably ahead of Pedersen and Kanaan. Any higher than that, do you reckon?
Probably not, looking at the other full-timers or drivers that did at least part of a full schedule. It was definitely better than Pedersen, though. I think it was quite impressive, really, how he kind of just, especially in the second half of the year, kind of just, ousted Pedersen, really, and ended up, it was 18 points, Rob's advantage over Pedersen, and I think for really most of the second half of the year, he was ahead of his fellow rookie.
Yeah. Right, Devin DiFrancesco, second year, so doesn't have that rookie expectation. Didn't see much of DiFrancesco apart from that rather bizarre first lap in Indianapolis. Other than that, we didn't really see any of DiFrancesco. He actually had less points than he got last year, which is slightly bizarre. But yeah, where do you rank DiFrancesco's year?
I did have a sense that he improved. It wasn't you didn't feel like it was a really poor year. Obviously, ended the year in not the greatest of fashion. I think was with Malukas, he had the contact at Laguna, and then a lot of
leader's circle.
Yeah, a lot of controversy around the manner in which he missed out in leader's circle. And I think not to make the leader's circle in an Andretti, yes, it's a different program to a degree, but it's still an Andretti car, and to miss out on the leader's circle driving for Andretti is not a great look when you have competed in the entire season. So I feel like the Gallagher Grand Prix performance was kind of a sign that when he's got the car beneath him and really feels like at home in the car, that he can deliver, and he's got speed, and he's got bravery, and he's got that racecraft to send it around the outside of 4 cars in the first corner. But yeah, on the whole, it was not a season that made you think that Andretti had to go out of their way to keep hold of him by any means.
I think as well, if it wasn't for that one performance, I feel like, apart from obviously the little bit of contact, I feel like he would have faded into the background a bit more. I feel like sometimes you kind of forget that he's there, and it's like I said, you're in an Andretti, and it's meant to be good. It's meant to be kind of towards the front, and even though it is a different program, it still doesn't take away from that. I don't know. I don't want to be harsh for the section with the category and put him in the bump from the list, but I'm not sure where he would go, to be fair.
I think the way I see DiFrancesco this off-season is I don't see him as someone that teams that acquire him are making a horrendous move. He's a third-year driver. I mean, we saw in the junior ranks, he finished second in his single year in USF Pro 2000, which is a good effort. 6th in his single year in Indy Lights. So that's really not horrendous. I think it was always going to take time for him to develop into IndyCars, just because he has kind of been fast-tracked up the ranks. I don't see him as an option that teams that you'd see as a disappointing acquisition. I think there are better options out there, but I think he could be of benefit to a team like Coyne, and he could fit in there. So I'd be tempted not to put him in bump from the list. I don't feel like he was as bad as Jack Harvey, for instance, but I think maybe quite right at the bottom, if not quite bumped, because
I'd say it's better than Pedersen.
Better than Pedersen, yeah, that's respectable. I was just thinking in the context of the fact that he's in Andretti and failed to make the leader's circle. Yeah. So But yeah, I can respect that decision.
Cool. Go for that. Right. P21, one of my personal favourites. Augustine Canapino. Now, we've spoken about Canapino loads and loads this year, so we probably won't spend too long on him, but I mean, what a year. I mean, results on paper really don't reflect that, which is really disappointing because there was such a good chance that potentially easily a top 10, potentially a podium at the Gila Seca. Obviously didn't quite work out. But for a driver who has never raced a single seater, so I can't even say it, yet alone in IndyCar, didn't speak English at the start of the year, you thought he'd take so long to adapt. He'd really struggled this year, but he has adapted brilliantly. He's pretty likeable. He's been enjoying experience, and he's just a much more all-rounder driver than we thought he would be.
Again, there's no massive need to speak hugely in depth. I think go and listen to last week's episode because we spoke in a lot of detail about him as our surprise of the season because he came in with no expectations. He was an unknown. He came from a background where he wasn't racing single-seaters, open-wheel cars. He was, he's driven stock cars all of his life, and he's a hero back home in Argentina. And I think his performances moving stateside have proven, he's a really talented race car driver. I mean, it's slightly bizarre that his best results, the best result of 12th place, which he achieved 3 times. 2 of those occasions were actually in his opening 2 races, which St. Pete was, slightly, anomalous in the fact that it was a completely chaotic race. But Texas to finish 12th on merit in his first oval race is just a remarkable achievement. Yeah. And then you felt through the likes of Detroit, where he finished 14th, and then Toronto was possibly his best weekend, maybe aside from Laguna, where he'd put himself in the position to get a possible podium, qualified 13th, and very nearly made the Fast 12. So, yeah, I mean, I really hope that he does come back for another year because he was exciting, and I feel like he will only develop further. I think it's been mentioned. I think Kevin Lee said that the financial situation in Argentina isn't great at the moment, so that is pouring a little bit of uncertainty over whether Canapino can have a ride funded, but I think he has done more than enough to warrant coming back. And I mean, he really just looked he had the measure of the 2 rookies with American experience, and he came not knowing the tracks, not knowing single-seater cars, and just adapted seamlessly. I mean, he was 53 points ahead of Stingray Rob, and that's how many points did I just say? Did I say 53? I meant 33. 33 points. Yeah, 33 points.
Yeah. Good effort from Canapino. Really good first year. I think signs are certainly there. Let's hope he does get the budget, because if he's been that encouraging the first year, hopefully he's going to be even better in the second year. Where does Canapino go? I'm thinking mid as Ohio.
I was actually going to go one higher and say he was as strong as a Dallara DW12. Just, I think, relative to the lack of expectation, the lack of hype surrounding him, I feel like he was actually, if I was to describe his season in one word, I would say it was impressive. And I think, that probably warrants going in a slightly higher, above average category for me.
Oh, yeah. Convinced me. Don't think it was as impressive as Lundqvist, but I was solid. Let's go Marcus Armstrong. Obviously only did 12 races because he didn't do the ovals. Best qualifying is 7th for the Indy Road Course. Best race finish of 7th at Toronto, but he picked up 3/8 and a 9th. It was a good year for Armstrong. It wasn't spectacular. I think he kind of lacked a headline result as such, but he did enough to prove that he deserves a second season, and I think he did a fairly respectable job.
Yeah, I think it was just a case of things didn't quite come together for him, unfortunately. I mean, he looked like he could really be genuinely pushing for a podium at Road America before, for some reason, he was kept out under a caution, and and when he pitted, he ends up at the back of the field. But yeah, to pick up several top 10s, he finished 11th twice as well. I feel like the Indy GP weekend was the second Indy GP was possibly his strongest weekend. Actually, he I think was the highest qualifying Ganassi car, and unfortunately he was tagged by Palou on the opening lap, and that ruined what looked like a chance to be a really good result. So I think he could have come away from the season with a couple of top fives in another world, really. And I think it's notable that he performed so well returning to the Indy Road Course. It'll be interesting to see what happens next year when he returns to tracks after having one experience of racing around there. So yeah, I think it says a lot about the great job that Armstrong did, as I think we've already said, that Chip has given him a multi-year deal and has the faith that he can really fulfill a full-time program and excel. So yeah, good rookie season for Armstrong.
Yeah, I think it's been a strong rookie season as well, because he obviously wasn't racing in the ovals, and he still managed to kind of come ahead just kind of in the last race. And I feel like he obviously wasn't up where all the Ganassis were racing, but I feel like he was on the level of where he should be as a rookie for the team. And I think as well with next season, when he is on the ovals and when he's gone on all the tracks more, I feel like he'll be really strong, and it'd be like really nice to see how that will turn out.
Yeah, I think it was creditable that Armstrong was, at times through the season on par with his teammates. I mean, you look even at Laguna, he was fighting with Scott Dixon, and this is 6-time champ Dixon, 2-time champ, and the best driver in the series at the moment, Alex Palou. Marcus Ericsson, who's won multiple races, won an Indy 500, has F1 experience. And Armstrong, yes, he wasn't quite up to their standard, but he was definitely competitive with them more than once, whether that be in qualifying or races. So I think with more experience, he'll only grow further.
Yeah. Thinking stronger as the Dallara DW12 maybe ahead of Canapino?
Yeah, I would say so.
Place him in there. Right. Let's move on to 19th for the standings, who was Santino Ferrucci, who, outside the Indy 500, had a pretty quiet year. I don't think there's really too much for Ferrucci. He was comfortably better than Peterson, but that was sort of an expectation. But yeah, just a really quiet year for Ferrucci. We didn't really see much of him at all.
Yeah, I think from other than the Indy 500 where he finished third, I think everything else was it like in the, not the late 10s, but in the 10s, he finished 11th. And then, I don't know, I feel like you didn't hear much from him at the beginning, and then the Indy 500, and then you heard a lot about him, and then I feel like he just faded away a little bit. I feel like he possibly had his moments, but yes, like I said, it was very quiet.
I mean, the words quiet and Ferrucci aren't usually particularly synonymous with one another, but it wasn't like an unbelievably impressive season, but I think he showed at the 500 where he is just unbelievable year on year.
Yeah.
That he showed there that when he has the car beneath him, he can really deliver. And I think I think they will probably push to keep hold of him next year. I don't see why they wouldn't. There's not masses of better options than him out there. He's clearly talented as much as he is quite a Marmite character at times. And yeah, I feel like his season was pretty bang average, really. He was, I think, Foyt just generally, especially on road and street courses, aside from where there was a repave, incidentally, they impressed at Road America.
They
qualified
for the fast
12th. Yeah, qualified 11th. Then Laguna likewise, unfortunately, had a grid drop. But even at Laguna, he was quickly back up into the top 10.
Yeah.
So
until that
when he has
miraculous save.
Yeah, that was incredible. When he has the car beneath him, he's clearly an incredibly skilled driver. I think I'd say his season was as mid as Ohio, really, but
agreed.
I don't think it was a bad year. It was just an unusually quiet year.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's proven in IndyCar before that he's a pretty solid driver, and I think he's a good driver for it to have. Got a bit of experience, and he might be looking to go even better at the 500 next year. They can only build on what they've got, and I think he had a decent year, as you said. So weird for Santino Ferrucci to be quiet. I mean, he kept himself pretty quiet at times this year, but yeah. Helio Castroneves, number 18. Again, a bit of a weird one for Helio Castroneves. I feel like the only time we ever saw him was spinning somewhere in the wall. He didn't really crash, he just spun everywhere. So, bit of a bizarre one. I mean, it was all right. I think it was just a bit of a party season to see his way out of IndyCar. But yeah, I don't really know what to say on Castroneves' year. It was all right. Sad to see him go, but yeah, what more could you say?
It felt a bit Jimmy Johnson the way he was just spinning a lot and not actually hitting things that often.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a bizarre year, to be honest, because I was doing the maths earlier, and his average race finish, unless I've made some sort of error, was actually 17th, which was slightly higher than I anticipated. Really, he just didn't have the. Yeah, I mean, I think road and street courses ultimately he's not got what he used to have, and he's clearly been on the decline. 10th at Texas was his best finish of the season, so only a single top 10. I think it just got to a stage where he just was lacking a bit of pace. You were seeing Lundqvist come in and really kind of show him who's boss at times, and yeah, I kind of feel like he was just. It was a bit of a messy year. It was a year that, you know, it wasn't horrendous. There were some bad weekends, but yeah, just a fairly quiet way to bow out from his full-time IndyCar career, really.
Yeah. I don't really know what to say on Castroneves this year. Just he managed to avoid the wall pretty well, and that was about it. What order can you say? I'm thinking not quite bumped somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know really. I feel like it was quite an average year, but he was probably better than Daly, wasn't he?
Yeah, probably on the level. I mean, Daly did outperform in the races they did together.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
I'd put him probably on par with Daly then, not
but
quite
slightly
bumped.
behind Daly. Better than Pagenaud behind Daly. I think that's fair.
Yeah, that's fair
year
enough.
than Pagenaud up to that point. So
yeah, which is actually quite
reasonable.
surprising, because I seem to recall feeling like the start of the year was almost worse for Castroneves, and then he actually seemed to maybe have a few less issues as the year went on. But yeah, I think maybe that outlines really, in terms of Pagenaud, that maybe his performances were also kind of dropping off a little bit. I know he did have a bit of misfortune, to be fair, but
yeah. Right, there we are. Next one, David Malukas. Again, it just feels like a bit of a weird year. It started off pretty. Apart from Texas, it felt like the first half of the season was pretty poor for Malukas, and then second half of the season he was really, really impressive.
he couldn't catch a break at the start of the year. I feel there was just stuff going wrong for him, just time and time again. He had that string of just failing to finish races, and yeah, I don't think that start to the season was really a reflection on him. Obviously, he had an impressive rookie year. Then, yeah, it was a tough start to the season. Obviously, Texas 4th place really showed his pedigree on ovals. I mean, he is an outstanding oval driver. Clearly, I know the 500 didn't end the way that he would have liked, and Coyne didn't quite have the package that Malukas would have liked, but actually he comfortably got into the field for the 500, which I think was one of the most impressive qualifying runs that we saw. I think he qualified 23rd in the end, after really looking like he was going to be labouring down, possibly having to contend with a bump. He managed to pull out a fantastic 4 laps. Yeah, then you look at Iowa, 12th and 8th finish, having qualified. You know, his laps were good enough for 9th and then 3rd as well. Gateway picking up a second consecutive podium at Worldwide Technology Raceway. But it wasn't just that. I think despite Coyne's struggles, as was kind of outlined by Rob, struggling to find any major pace, he still managed to pull out a 6th at Mid-Ohio. He managed to pull out an 8th at Portland. It was a really solid end to the season. I think we must also mention qualifying 5th at Nashville before his rear wing very oddly fell off. So I think the latter end of the season was back to the Malukas that we saw signs of in his debut year. Yeah,
so from the second half of the season, ended up with 4 top 8 finishes, and you have Nashville, which won the factors, as well as Laguna, where he could have been in for a good position. So all round a pretty good year. I'm thinking somewhere between stronger as the Dallara and mid as a Ohio?
I would say stronger as a Dallara, personally. I think I think especially the latter stage of the year and his oval performance in particular were pretty stellar, to be fair.
Where does he go? Ahead of Armstrong?
I would say ahead of Armstrong.
Ahead of Lundqvist?
Yeah, probably, actually.
Yeah, let's put it in there. And let's do one more to end the episode. Callum Ilott. Bit of a weird... It felt quiet for Ilott at the majority of the time. It was bookended by 2 fifth-place finishes, and let's be honest, it was a good result, but they were both fairly chaotic races.
Yeah, I think a lot of the reason for Ilott being, fairly anonymous at times was just the fact that Hunkost really didn't have that faster car in qualifying. He never qualified inside the top, I think 15th was his best until there seemed to be some sort of breakthrough later in the year. Started 9th in Gateway, I think penalties there. Started 8th in Portland. So he did find some pace laterally, but he just had this knack to just seamlessly, really, and almost quietly, but I think in a very assured manner, just make his way through the field. And ultimately, an average race finish of 15th was very impressive for, again, a team that, it's only they're still only just growing into IndyCar, and it was their first year of having 2 cars as well. So that was always going to cause a bit of unsettlement, but Ilott really led the team forward. And I think, obviously, we have to mention the Indy 500, which was so tough. There was this inherent car issue, and then on the eve of qualifying to change the chassis, yet he still made the field, and then finished 12th in the race, which was a remarkable feat, really, when you consider everything that went on. So, yeah, it was a solid year for Armstrong. It's a shame for Ilott. It's a shame that, unfortunately, it doesn't look like he'll get that move to a top team for next year, with Malukas making the switch to McLaren. But I think another year of similar for Ilott. I mean, finishing 16th in the championship was mighty impressive, and 20th last year was impressive enough. So he's on a real upward trajectory still. And yeah, it was a bit of a quieter year maybe, but again, he improved.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like last season was almost more spectacular. I mean, I think it's hard to say, because I feel... Did Hunkost have a drop of performance? I don't know. I feel
like they possibly did, especially in terms of qualifying.
So certainly in qualifying they did, yeah. But hard to say, because he didn't get the move to the top team that everyone was kind of foreshadowing. But I don't think he was bad, but I don't think he was incredibly... It's hard to say, because I feel like on a personal level, he was much better than he has been before, but maybe the results don't reflect that as much on paper. It's hard to say. I feel like he's been okay. He hasn't been incredible, but yeah, it's a hard one.
I think one thing I saw as quite notable was the jump he made on ovals, actually, because obviously coming over from Europe and not racing on anything like an oval, it's going to be the road and street courses, and ovals are going to take time to adapt to. But here in his second year, I mean, he finished 7 places higher than he did last year at Texas. He finished, much higher at the 500. He obviously crashed out in 22. Actually, I think he injured his wrist as well. So to finish 12th at the 500 was a massive improvement. 20 places up from 32nd last year. Then Iowa this year was actually a slight drop off, but it was only marginal. And then Gateway, he was unfortunately put in the wall by Sato, and I think he had looked to be on for a decent result there. So I think he actually was lingering for most of the year around the sort of top 10 in terms of average oval finish. So I think improvements in that regard are actually quite significant in terms of Ilott being able to fire on all cylinders on every type of track.
Yeah. I think that's a good point you raised. He was better at ovals, and it's just... It's a weird year, because Hunkost haven't felt as strong, but maybe Ilott, if you look into it, has been stronger. His starts were particularly impressive this year. I think was something made out. Did he make the most places up on lap 1s or something like that? Yeah. Where are we ranking him? I feel like I feel I want to say mid as a higher, but that feels a tad harsh. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think I would say strong as a Dallara, just simply for the fact that he might have had a quiet year, but he's clearly improved on last season. Last season was, remarks as being quite an impressive year.
I don't know. It's either like on the top end of mid as a higher, or like on the maybe the bottom-ish end of stronger than thing. Just because I don't know. He obviously did better results-wise than Ferrucci, but then I feel like maybe not.
Was he more impressive than Canapino, do you think?
No, just because I think everyone had little expectations, so then he I don't know, blew everyone away, if that's the right wording to use.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one to categorise, really, because I think there were times where Canapino was competitive with Ilott, but ultimately there was a pretty major deficit in the championship, and while they did find each other on track at times, I think Ilott was the more impressive. Well, the more impressive if you don't consider all the context of Canapino coming from a background of never having raced anything similar. I think it just feels harsh to put. It would feel harsh to put Ilott as having an average season, because to finish 16th for a team who are in their third year of IndyCar, their second year full time, I think is an incredible achievement, really.
Yeah, let's put him one ahead of Canapino, below Armstrong.
That feels about right.
That feels fairish. Right, so there you have it. We'll leave it this week. So that is 23 drivers done. So we've got 5 in stronger as Dallara DW12, 1 in mid as a high, which I'm quite surprised about. I thought that would be absolutely stacked at the end of this episode, but not quite. 8 in not quite as bumped, 4 from back to the list, and 5 we just decided on where we're ranking up. Expect the next 15 to be vacating most of the top 4 categories, but we will see on that front next week. So, as you've probably gathered by now, that is all we've got time for. I will put this, I will link this somewhere either this week or next week, so you can have your own go at this tier list, and you can share it to us, and we'll see what we think of it. But yeah, thank you for watching, thank you for listening. It's been a bit of a longer one this week, but we need to occupy you somehow in the off season. So that's all we've got time for. We hope to see you for the top 15 next week. We'll see you then.